The best gardens are not built on fertilizer bags or quick fixes, but on living soil that teems with invisible allies. Earthworms, fungi, and soil microbes form the true foundation of fertility. Yet many gardeners, even experienced ones, forget that this underground ecosystem needs food. Just as plants require carbohydrates from photosynthesis, microbes in the soil need energy to multiply and work. There is a simple, old-fashioned ingredient that delivers this boost: molasses. When added to compost tea, it becomes a direct food source for beneficial bacteria, and creates a chain reaction that ends with more worms, faster decomposition, and ultimately rich humus. Before diving into the how-to, pause and imagine the difference between a stagnant compost pile that barely heats up, and a bubbling brew alive with activity. In one, microbes are starving. In the other, they are thriving and multiplying, ready to colonize your soil the moment you pour it on. The secret that flips the switch is sugar, and molasses is the most concentrated, slow-release, and microbe-friendly form you can give. Let's break down how it works, how to prepare it properly, and why this simple syrup attracts earthworms in droves when applied to your beds. At its core, molasses is the concentrated byproduct of sugarcane or sugar beet processing. Unlike refined sugar, it contains trace minerals, iron, potassium, and organic compounds that make it far more than just empty sweetness. Microbes feast on the readily available sugars, using them as fuel for reproduction and metabolism. When bacteria have a steady energy source, they break down organic matter more efficiently, release nutrients faster, and multiply at rates impossible in sugar-starved conditions. In compost tea, the difference is striking. A brew made only with compost and water will encourage some microbial release, but the numbers are modest. Add molasses, and within 24 to 36 hours, you see explosive growth. The liquid begins to bubble as bacteria metabolize the sugars, and soon the tea is loaded with billions of organisms per milliliter. This living solution is what feeds your soil, not just with nutrients, but with actual life. It's important to understand balance here. Too much molasses can actually tip the scales toward anaerobic conditions which, favor harmful bacteria. The key really lies in modest feeding, enough to stimulate those beneficial microbes without overwhelming the system. And honestly, that's exactly why preparation matters. A successful compost tea has 3 essential parts: high-quality compost or worm castings, clean, non-chlorinated water, and a food source like molasses. So, to get started, you'll need a container that's big enough for brewing. Usually a 5-gallon bucket for small gardens or, a larger drum if you're working with serious beds. Fill it up with water and let it sit uncovered overnight, especially if you're using tap water. This gives the chlorine time to dissipate since, chlorine can suppress microbial activity. Next, into this water, drop in a mesh bag filled with finished compost or worm castings. Just think of it like a tea bag. The compost brings in the microbial inoculant. That's your starting population of bacteria and fungi. To feed them, add a small amount of unsulfured blackstrap molasses. For a typical 5-gallon brew, you only need about 2 tablespoons. Give the water a good stir, or for best results, use an aquarium bubbler to keep oxygen moving through. This helps prevent anaerobic pockets and makes sure your microbes can breathe and reproduce freely. Over the next 24 to 48 hours, the tea comes alive. You may notice foam forming on the surface or a rich earthy smell developing. This is the sign that microbes are multiplying in vast numbers. Beyond this point, the food runs out and populations can crash, so the tea should be used promptly when it reaches peak activity. Once brewed, the tea becomes a powerful soil drench. Pour it directly onto garden beds, raised boxes, or around fruit trees. What you are doing is inoculating the soil with billions of beneficial microbes while also supplying them with the residual sugars from molasses. These organisms immediately colonize organic matter in your soil, breaking it down faster and unlocking trapped nutrients. The effect compounds. As they work, earthworms are drawn in. Earthworms are not directly eating the molasses, but they are attracted to the explosion of microbial life and the softened organic matter that results. A soil surface drenched with compost tea becomes easier for them to digest and richer in microbe-coated particles. In a matter of weeks, worm populations expand because the habitat has improved. With more worms come more castings, and castings are one of the richest natural sources of humus. Foliar spraying is another application method. When you spray diluted compost tea onto leaves, it delivers microbes that can suppress disease organisms, while, at the same time, trace nutrients feed the plant directly. Molasses in this context not only fuels those microbes, but can also act as a mild sticker, which helps the spray cling to foliage a bit longer. A lot of gardeners wonder whether molasses supports fungi as well as bacteria. Honestly, the answer depends on conditions. Molasses tends to favor bacteria first, since they consume simple sugars really quickly. Fungi, on the other hand, thrive on more complex carbon sources, like wood chips and lignin. However, a surge in bacteria can actually create conditions that eventually support fungi by breaking down tougher matter into intermediate compounds that fungi can colonize. So, if your goal is to support fungal dominance, you can still use molasses, but you'll want to pair it with woody compost or humic acids to balance out the brew. This way, the tea doesn't tip entirely toward bacteria, but instead fosters a more diverse microbial community. And honestly, this diversity is what really benefits your soil in the long run, since both bacteria and fungi play important roles in humus formation. The simplicity of molasses and compost tea often leads gardeners to, overuse it. One common mistake is just adding way too much syrup. Heavy doses can actually create these anaerobic conditions that smell, honestly, pretty sour or even putrid instead of that nice earthy aroma. This is a sign that harmful microbes are growing, and those can really damage your plants. So sticking to small amounts is key for a balanced fermentation. Another error folks make is brewing the tea for too long. A lot of people assume that a week-long brew will be stronger, but in reality, microbial populations actually peak at about 24 to 48 hours. After that, they either starve, die off, or shift toward less helpful species. So always use the tea fresh and never store it for more than a day. A third important point is water quality. Chlorinated water is kind of the silent killer for a lot of compost teas. Always dechlorinate your water by leaving it uncovered overnight, or better yet, use rainwater if you can. The difference in microbial counts is pretty significant. And finally, never forget about oxygen. Stirring your brew daily does help, but honestly, continuous aeration with a simple bubbler is what really keeps the tea aerobic. Beneficial microbes just thrive on oxygen, while many pathogens, they actually prefer those anaerobic conditions. Earthworms are, you could say, nature's plows. When compost tea with molasses makes its way into the soil, it creates a sort of buffet of microbial proteins that coat every single particle of organic matter. Worms can sense this through their chemoreceptors and will migrate toward the richest zones. They gobble up this microbe-laden matter, digest it, and then excrete castings that are just packed with stable humus and plant-ready nutrients. Over time, areas treated with molasses compost tea can show dramatic increases in worm populations, sometimes even doubling within a single season. This is why old gardeners often said, feed the soil, not the worms. By feeding microbes with molasses, you're actually, indirectly feeding worms with what they want most, microbe-rich food. Repeated applications of molasses compost tea really transform soil structure over time. As microbes multiply and worms tunnel through, compacted soil becomes a whole lot more porous. Water infiltration improves, roots can spread more easily, and nutrient cycles start to accelerate. Humus levels climb as organic matter is broken down and stabilized by all that microbial activity. Within just a season, most gardeners notice darker soil, easier tillage, and honestly, much stronger plant growth. Over the years, the effect just keeps compounding until the soil becomes almost self-sustaining, needing fewer and fewer external amendments. The small effort of brewing molasses compost tea really pays back in long-lasting fertility. In every handful of soil there's a hidden universe, and molasses is, one of the simplest ways to energize it. By providing fast energy to microbes, it turns an ordinary compost tea into a living elixir, Used wisely, it multiplies bacteria, awakens fungi, and draws earthworms right into your beds. The result is not just more fertile soil today, but a legacy of humus-rich earth for seasons to come. If you found this guide useful and want to keep learning the timeless secrets of soil health, remember to subscribe to Soil and Plant Doctor and share this with fellow gardeners. Together, we can revive our soils, build fertility the natural way, and pass on the wisdom of living Earth to the next generation.